Hey guys, I'm Danielle. Our group is going to be presenting the second half of chapter 5. I'm going to start us off, and then Manpreet's going to take over, and then I think Nicholas is going to end the chapter for us. So basically, the first thing we're going to talk about is why managers behave unethically, and there is no shortage of real life examples for this. Some that come to my mind would be like Amazon and tax avoidance, Nestle and child labor criticisms, and like the fair trade thing, and like it's just really common to see companies being heavily criticized for acting unethically. So it really just begs the question, why? So these 6 determinants attempt to explain what might provoke people to act in ways that are seen as unethical, and the first one we're going to talk about is personal ethics. So these can be developed through sources including parents, schools, religious upbringings, beliefs, and the media that you're exposed to. They are formed pretty early on in life, and they're not really subject to change. It's just really ingrained in you and like who you are as a person based on how you grew up. And so people whose personal ethics are slightly unethical are more likely to also act unethically in a business setting, which makes sense if you think about it. The second dimension is societal culture. So basically, this is based on something called Hofstede's social culture dimensions, which I'm sure you've probably heard of before. Essentially, what its findings say is that companies with headquarters in countries that place more emphasis on masculinity and power distance dimensions, so this would be something like Russia. So these societies are more likely to act unethically, as opposed to countries who emphasize individualism and uncertainty avoidance dimensions, such as like Japan or Denmark, for example. The next one we're going to talk about is decision-making processes. So this is basically when business people behave unrealizingly unethically, simply because they fail to ask themselves whether or not the behavior that they're undertaking is ethical or not. Primarily, this happens because they're just so focused on the economic considerations that they fail to perceive the ethical considerations. The next dimension, or determinant, I should say, is leadership. So essentially what this suggests is that another cause of unethical behavior stems from how leaders in the company set standards and examples, like rules and guidelines, through their own behaviors and actions, and that these will essentially determine how the rest of the company acts. So the power of the people at the top to set an example and lead by example is really high because their actions will influence others. Number 5 is unrealistic performance goals. So when performance goals for a company are set in a way that they're almost impossible or super unrealistic to attain or achieve, the temptation to cut corners to achieve these goals can be really high. So this could even just look like management turning a blind eye in order to make sure that their company is reaching the performance goals. They might undertake things like bribery or the use of child labor just to get the numbers, and they fail to perceive the ethical costs of the situation. Number 6, organizational culture. This is the last one. Some business cultures don't encourage employees to think critically about ethical implications of their business decisions. And this is similar to the leadership one, except it's just kind of like more general. It's less based on the leaders and more of the organizational culture itself. So the values and norms of the organizational culture are going to prescribe like socially acceptable behaviors and influence the business decision making process of the others in the business and down the chain. So next we're going to talk about some philosophical approaches to ethics, and there are several different ones of these. So basically they're processes based on individual philosophies and ethics that determine what approach they're going to take when it comes to making ethical decisions. So some of the approaches that we're going to talk about are going to be better or more recommended than others. We're going to talk about those first. Those are the strawman approaches. And then the next philosophical approaches are going to be the ones that are more favored. They're just more whole, more rounded. They don't fail to consider some key components that the strawman ones fail to consider. Yeah, so we'll get started with those. The first one is the Friedman Doctrine. So basically, this one's a bit outdated, but it states that as long as the company stays within the law, that the social responsibility of a business is solely to increase profits, maximize profits to benefit the shareholders. It doesn't have to undertake any social expenditures that will affect the maximum profit at any kind. So if you kind of think about this one, in terms of a triple bottom line, it's more of a single bottom line. Instead of people, planet, profit, it's literally just profit. Don't do anything you don't need to do that's going to affect profit. Yeah, the next one is cultural relativism. So this is another common strawman approach. It's basically the belief that ethics are nothing more than a reflection of culture. And so firms should adopt the practice of the culture that they're operating in. Basically, that this philosophical approach does not agree that universal morals, such as slavery is wrong, for example, transcend culture. Basically, it says, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. So if the Romans believe slavery is a cool thing to do slavery. However, morally, we know that this isn't true. So obviously, cultural relativism fails to consider that. The next one is righteous moralist. Essentially, what this one says is that multinational corporations should follow ethical standards of their home country. So mostly this is referring to more industrialized countries that are operating in third world countries kind of situation. So this might seem really fair at first glance, but it does miss some key factors, has some key flaws. Mostly the biggest flaw is that many people say it goes too far. So for example, imagine compensating your Indonesian manufacturing plant workers in the same way that you would compensate your workers from headquarters in the United States. Imagine giving them the same minimum wage, paid sick leave, mat leave, health benefits, retirement coverage, etc., etc. It would defeat the purpose and opportunity of even doing business in these countries. So we can't go by the righteous moralist approach because it just wouldn't make sense if we were going by that. The next one is naive immoralist. So if everyone else is doing it, why can't I? Is basically what this one says. To me, this approach seems a little bit childish to say that an action is ethically justified just because the majority of people are partaking. It's kind of like when you're young and you're like, Mom, like, all my friends are doing it, why can't I? It just seems really like it's lacking a logical basis for this one. Basically, multinational corporations should recognize that they have the power to influence norms and they can make change positively in less developed countries. At the end of the day, it's the company's choice whether or not they want to follow what everyone else is doing or if they want to do something different and try to be a positive change. Okay, so now in contrast to the strawman approaches that we just discussed, we're now going to look at two other philosophical approaches to ethics. They're deeply rooted in history, they're really traditional approaches, and they actually allow for the more modern approaches kind of to like be built on their back. So the first one we're going to talk about is utilitarian ethics, which essentially sees that if the good outweighs the bad, the decision is an ethical one. So it focuses on maximizing good while minimizing harm, and carefully weighing all the pros and cons, and coming to a decision that provides the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. And that's really important to keep in mind. Kind of like the cost-benefit analysis has roots in this history, so that's like a more modern approach that was based on this one. The utilitarian approach still does have some drawbacks to keep in mind, and the first one of those is that it's just really hard to measure harm and benefits. How do you quantify it? How do you quantify the environmental harm done by drilling in the Arctic? You can't really put a number on it, which makes making fully educated decisions difficult because you just don't have perfect information to base your decision on. The second drawback is that it fails to consider distribution of justice. So the example that the textbook actually gives on this is to do with healthcare. So this example says, in order to keep healthcare affordable for the majority of people, the government decides under utilitarian approach that it is ethical to screen everybody for HIV, and those who test positive are disqualified from receiving healthcare coverage. So yes, this keeps the healthcare cheap for the greatest amount of people and therefore the greatest amount of good, but it discriminates really harshly against certain groups of people, which can be seen as unjust, for sure. So the second approach is Kantian ethics, developed by Immanuel Kant. So basically, this approach says that people should be treated as ends, and they're not means. They're not machines, they're not cogs in a machine or instruments for making money. They're people, and they have dignity, and working them long, grueling hours in sweatshops with questionable safety standards is not ethical, as human beings are people and they have dignity. And this is a notion, I think, that still resonates really strongly in the modern world and just like morally transcends for a lot of people. So I'm gonna pass it over to Manpreet for the rest.
Hello, my name is Manpreet, and here I would like to share my views on ethics and values. My team members also shared their views on ethics and values, so I would like to add on to the discussion here. So, how ethics and values are really important to a manager? I think it is really important because a lot of employees are working under manager, and they should have the ability to act ethical. So today, if we talk about 21st century in which we are living today, gig economy works here. So what is gig economy? Gig economy is basically a free economy where the workers are not permanent, where the workers are part-time, and it's a kind of a short-term job opportunity for them. Here are the examples like Uber, Amazon, Airbnb. So here I would like to add one more example, which is really common these days, which is known as skip the dishes. And I know many of students do that. Skip the dishes is kind of a short-term employment opportunity for the part-time workers. Um, Here there are some pros and cons of gig economy. Like pros, I can say that um, gig economy in gig economy, the employer do not have to invest on the employees. uh, they just welcome the employees, and who are interested, they just hire them. They don't give benefits to them, like health benefits or any other advantage like that. So they don't give that advantages. So it is very easy for the company to work in a gig economy, and it is really beneficial because they are promoting their company. So if we talk about this question, that it would be considered ethical to earn profit from a gig economy, this is really a sensitive question to these workplaces or to these employers, because they don't give benefits like health benefits or insurance benefits. So if an employee needs a treatment, uh, they would be unable to give them, and it is really a loss for the employees too. If they get hurt during the work, or if they need some assistance. So I think it is really very sensitive questions to answer that it is ethical, because yeah, it can be unethical as well. So moving on to the next slide. So here, how can manager make ethical decisions? Um, as I already said earlier that it is very important for the managers to be ethical and follow the ethical values because they have to manage all the employees. So, a very first and simple, I know it can be said that following or making ethical decisions is simple, but no, it is really difficult at the same time. Managers had to think a lot about the employees. Very first step, they can hire or promote people who have ethical values. They can stop promoting the people, or they can refrain the individuals who act unethically, and they should be punished too. They should be demoted. If a manager is behaving unethical, then there should be demotion for that too. So try to hire only people with strong ethics. Yes, it is really important. Managers are quite experienced. They know when they are interviewing people, they know that with their conversation that people follow ethics or not. So yeah, they can hire people who have the respect for the values and have strong ethics. The third, we can say that prospective employees should find out as much as they can about the ethical climate in an organization prior to taking a position. Yes, it is also very important. They should know the ethical climate. They should create the ethical climate as well. So, moving on to the next slide. What is the second thing a manager can do? Build an organizational culture that places a high value on ethical behavior. Obviously, it is really important to build organizational culture. I think manager is a leader who represent honesty, courage, and we can say integrity, fairness. So uh, all these we can say that value. All these things should be in a manager to lead and to create the environment. Articulate values that place a strong emphasis on ethical behavior. Yes, the manager should follow. If the manager is following the values, then automatically the worker will be motivated to follow the values. Emphasize the importance of code of ethics. There are some code of conduct for ethics too. So workers should be clear about that code of conduct. Implement a system of incentives and rewards that recognize people who engage in ethical. There should be, yes, it is a very good motivation. Sometimes there should be a negative and a positive motivation. This can be a positive motivation. There should be incentives or rewards for the people who actually behave ethical and who respect values. And they should, if the manager is praising a person who is really ethical and who respect the values in front of everyone, it is also a kind of motivation, and it is, we can say that it is a non-monetary motivation for them. So third, what a manager can do, make sure that leaders within the business articulate the rhetoric of ethical behavior and act in a manner that is consistent with that rhetoric. Exactly. So the managers is at the top. Under the manager, there are some leaders who basically not direct lead various kind of groups, various kinds of departments. So they should make sure that leader are following the same ethics and values and same code of conduct, so that the workers should be ethical and they can achieve the goals. Give life and meaning to words. Exactly. They should be very true to their words. They should be true to their values. Make sure that leaders emphasize the importance of ethics verbally through their actions. So, according to me, there is a direct link between the leadership and ethics. And trust also requires ethics, because to earn trust is really difficult for a leader. They can only the workers can only trust the leaders if they are if they have ethical values, if they are following ethics, because the workers can know that the leader is very true, very fair, and very honest. He is not biased to one person or the other. And a leader should be a role model for their workers. So yeah, so ethics is really important for the managers so that a manager can be a good role model for their workers. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Nick and I will be guiding you through the remainder of the chapter. We will continue by talking about how managers can make ethical decisions, and according to point 4, that is by putting decision-making processes in place that require people to consider the ethical dimensions of business decisions. So beginning off, we can ask whether decisions fall within the acceptable values of standards that typically apply in the organizational environment. So one value that would be broken in most businesses would be to steal. So stealing from employees or stealing from the company, that would be one example of a value that would be broken in almost any workplace environment. The second would be asking whether decisions can be communicated to all stakeholders affected by it. So if a manager makes one mistake, such as lying to other businesses or to its employees, that could be something that could affect the entire company as a whole. So that could affect every employee under the payroll, and it could affect the supervisor as well. The third point would be if colleagues would approve of these decisions. So if every single one of the people that you ask that you're working with say that the decision that you're thinking about doing is unethical, then it probably is, talking from people that are in the same situation as you. Managers can also use a 5-step process to think through ethical problems. Step 1. Identify which stakeholders, and what stakeholders are the individuals or group who have an interest, stake, or claim in the actions and overall performance of a company a decision would affect, and in what ways. So to break it down, there are 2 main types of stakeholders, the first being internal stakeholders, which are people who work for or who own the business, such as employees, the board of directors, and stockholders. The second type of stakeholders would be external stakeholders, which are the individuals or group who have some claim on a firm, such as customers, suppliers, and unions. The main point of this slide is for us to understand that a manager's actions have the chance to not only affect themselves, but that of all others with any relation to the company. This can be done in a positive or a negative way, which is why it is so important to practice ethical behavior in the workplace. Step 2. Determine whether a proposed decision would violate the fundamental rights of any stakeholders. An example would be if a CEO owned 2 separate companies and they made the unethical decision to sabotage one in a way that would benefit the other. So for example, if Coke and Pepsi were owned by the same person, and if they were to go out and say, hey everybody, Pepsi stinks, don't buy Pepsi, you should buy Coke instead. If that negatively affected Pepsi's sales, that would be a good example in this case. Moving on to step 3, establish moral intent. And what the definition of moral intent is the desire to act ethically when facing a decision and overcoming the rationalization to not be ethical this time. So to summarize, it means to show that you tried your best to make the ethically correct decision. Step 4. Engage in ethical behavior. From a manager's point of view, it could mean lead by example. If people see that you are making morally sound decisions, it may encourage them to do the same. And to take it one step further, a manager could discourage unethical behavior and to show that there are consequences for bad decisions. Step 5. Audit decisions and review them to make sure that they are consistent with ethical principles. This step is often overlooked, even though it is critical to finding out whether a decision process is working out. So what this means is that every business decision a manager makes should be documented and evaluated in a way that can be beneficial for future decisions. Many firms now have ethics officers. What is an ethics officer? I googled it. An ethics officer is somebody who aligns the practices of a workplace with the stated ethics and beliefs of that workplace, holding people accountable to ethical standards. So basically, if ethics is the law, they are the police of a certain workplace. So they ensure all employees are trained in ethics, ethics is considered in the decision-making process, and the company's code of conduct is followed. Number 5. Develop moral courage. Moral courage enables managers to walk away from a decision that is profitable but unethical. An example being a company using biodegradable paper straws that cost 2 cents each instead of plastic straws that cost 1 cent. Although paper straws may cost twice as much, it is much more of an ethically sound decision to go with the paper, even though they stick together sometimes and they can be a little bit annoying. But moving on, giving the employee the strength to say no to a superior who instructs her to pursue actions that are unethical. Don't be part of the problem. This ties directly to the next point. Gives employees the integrity to go public to the media and blow the whistle on persistent unethical behavior in a company. It is important to report unethical behavior because going back to the slide 31 here, all these people are affected by it. So definitely something to keep in mind. And finally, in the end, there are clearly things that an international business should do, and there are things that an international business should not do. But it is important to remember that not all ethical dilemmas have a clean and obvious solution. In these situations, firms must rely on the decision-making abilities of its managers. It's been a pleasure. This is Nick and all of Group 8 signing out.